Okay, folks, why don't we go ahead and get started? One thing that's kind of nice is we don't have a real extensive agenda today, so it'd be nice for us to kind of just walk our way through it and give ourselves all the time that we need to discuss the various issues. But I think that there's a decent chance we'll be able to wrap up the meeting a little bit early if everything goes well. So we'll go ahead and get the meeting started. This is the Colorado Transportation Commission workshops for January 15th, times about 1:01 p.m. according to my computer here. And we'll go ahead and get started into the very first presentation, which is our budget workshop. And we've got Jeff and Bethany up for that. Jeff, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you. Yes, we have two topics in today's workshop. I'll start off with an amendment to the current fiscal year 25 budget. And then Bethany will follow up with sort of a status update on where we're at with respect to the fiscal year 26 budget. So let's go on to the next slide, please. So, and we can skip one more ahead. So we have one item in this month's budget amendment, which is a request to allocate approximately $5,352,000 from the Commission Program Reserve on line 73 to the Geohazards Mitigation Program on line 7 for the statewide avalanche mitigation program. If approved, I think this is actually a typo. I think if approved, the remaining balance is currently $50 million. If this request is approved, it will bring it down to approximately $45 million. Let's go on to the next slide. The $5.35 million in funding is requested in order to provide state match for a $21.4 million grant request under the Protect Discretionary Grant Program, which is a grant program new under the IIJA, which is focused on strengthening transportation infrastructure resilience. Let's go to the next slide. The funding is for what we call the Statewide Avalanche Protocol Project, or the SWAP project. This is a project to modernize CDOT's current avalanche mitigation technology by replacing World War II era howitzer cannons with remote avalanche control systems. These remote avalanche control systems are more cost and time efficient, more environmentally sustainable, and it also reduces our reliance on the military, which I believe is pushing DOTs to get off of the howitzer program. I don't think they intend to continue to make parts and ammunition available long term. So the grant project includes funding for the remote avalanche systems, as well as funding for a small slope study to identify best mitigation strategies for smaller slopes such as Berthoud Pass. And it also includes funding for 5 truck-mounted rotary snow blowers. The total project cost is approximately $27 million, with this request of $5.35 million representing the 20% required match. The project is broken into, I believe, 4 phases. Let's go ahead to the next slide. And if we are not successful with the grant, the intent would be to hold on to the funds and to utilize those funds to make partial progress toward the objective of replacing those howitzers statewide and installing remote avalanche control systems. So again, if we're asking for the funding now so that we can leverage the opportunity for grant funding through the Protect program. However, if we are not successful, our intent is to keep that grant match and just put it towards the first phases of this project as we continue to try to put together funding over time to reach that full $27 million price tag. Let's go to the next slide. That might be the last slide. So yeah, that is the last slide. So I do want to note we've got a few folks here if you have questions that are experts on this. Anna Dunn, you all know, helps with our grant applications. Anna's here. And Brian from our avalanche program is also here. So if anyone has any questions, I think Anna or Brian are probably more equipped than I am to get into the details on this one.
Commissioner Garcia.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I went to the source and asked what the locations were, but can you repeat what the locations are for us, please, for everybody's benefit?
Yeah. Yeah, step one, phase one would be finishing up I-70 just east of the Eisenhower Tunnel on Mount Bethel. Phase two would be Wolf Creek Pass. Phases three would be Coal Bank and Mullis Pass on US 550, and then the final would be Red Mountain Pass on 550 between Ouray and Silverton.
Thank you. I know these are valuable and I really support the effort. 4 of them will be in District 8, so really excited about the project and I hope you're successful in your grant. Thank you.
All right, any other questions on this topic?
Commissioner Ritter here. Just out of curiosity, on the old artillery, where does one get parts, or is that part of the problem? And I know we're replacing them with a higher quality howitzer, but there will be some left in operation, correct? Some of the older ones.
The howitzers?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's all leased through the Army. There is a limited number of parts and pieces as these are 1940
Yeah, I know.
issued weapons from World War II. So we have an okay stockpile, but yeah, as these weapons age out, parts and pieces and ammunition are sunsetting.
Okay, and, I see, Commissioner Bowman, you've got a question?
I just wanted to say I'm very excited about this. I know it's been so needed, and so I just wanted to comment on that. I'm really glad that we're able to do this. Thanks. That's
All right, any other questions or comments? Hearing none, okay, Jeff, go ahead.
Okay, and I am going to hand it over to Bethany. So we're going to transition from fiscal year 25 to our proposed fiscal year 26 budget. Bethany?
All right, thank you. So I just wanted to take some time to go over a few items related to the development of the FY26 budget allocation plan. We're working towards our final plan. So typically we don't often bring this in January, but this is turning out to be a rather eventful budget year. So we thought we would keep you informed on kind of the various topics that are influencing the development of next year's budget. Next slide, please. So we're going to go over the latest results of our revenue forecast. So we update our revenue forecast quarterly. We want to share with you the most recent update. We will include a look at our federal obligation limitation and our assumptions there. We also will share with you a little bit about how our internal budget development process is going by talking about internal decision items. And then quickly review, we brought this to you in the fall, but just review as a reminder what was submitted as part of the governor's budget request on November 1st as far as our legislative decision items. Talk about kind of this legislative budget status, where we're at, what's happened, what's going on, where we're going, and then timeline and next steps. Next slide, please. So first, a look at our quarterly revenue forecast update. This bar chart on the right side here kind of gives you a graphical look, a comparison between the CDOT forecast, which is in orange, in comparison to Legislative Council, which is the yellow, and then the Office of State Planning and Budgeting, which is the sort of blue-purple color, which is the governor's office. So you can see that we are very, very close to the other forecasts. There's not really a material difference there. We kind of like to check a little sanity check to make sure we're not too far off, but we might be slightly more optimistic. But the bad news is that based on data through November, so the last few months, the revenue from actual fuel taxes and fees has been underperforming compared to recent fiscal years. So our forecast has actually been adjusted downwards from the previous quarter, which we used to set our draft budget. We're going to continue to monitor this, of course, and make adjustments as we look at kind of the next quarter. We'll update it in 3 months and take a look at where we're at then. We can, if you'd like more information, there is a more detailed memo I'll note in the packet at the end in the informational section. Next slide. So what does that mean for our budget? At the bottom line, it means that we have about $12.8 million less when we look at our final budget. So next month, we'll return to kind of have a final draft for review. And at that point, we'll make all of the updates to the one sheet. So we didn't include a one sheet in your packet because you'll see that next month. But it will include kind of a downward forecast of 12.8 million. So that includes 3.6 million less in first stream revenue and 9.3 million less in second stream revenue. We did include a note here on the faster forecast just to say that that hasn't changed. So that was kind of the update we wanted to provide there. So what does that mean for the FY26 annual budget? We typically balance our flexible state funds kind of in that commission reserve line. So that is going to be reduced from 18.4 million to 5.6 million. And like I mentioned, we'll bring that next month. Next slide. I did want to take a minute and review our assumptions behind the federal obligation limitation. In prior years, we've kind of been using 93% as our assumption, but over the last year or two, we've seen obligation limitation numbers much lower than that, and that has resulted in a downward revenue reconciliation number. So in the fall, after the fiscal year closes and we come back, and true up all of our forecasts and budget to what we actually received, it has meant that there is a pretty significant negative true up. And sometimes, well, not sometimes, always that can be quite hard to adjust to. So, not only in the inflexible programs that take those reductions directly, they've been spending the year operating on one assumption and then have to adjust, but also with the flexible funds that come out kind of balancing out of the program reserve, which you probably recall from this past fall. So when we drafted the budget, we decided to adjust that downward to an 87% assumption to try to kind of head off those large negative adjustments in the fall. That being said, Congress recently did pass some legislation. I believe it's called the Water Resources Act, something to that, Water Resources Development Act of 2024, that has some changes in policy that will maybe impact this. So right now, the staff is analyzing that and determining how that will impact our assumptions, but it could possibly mean a higher obligation limitation and a lower redistribution, but we're taking a look at exactly how that will impact maybe what our best guess is going to be, and we'll try to bring that in more detail next month. I think the one thing to note then on the front end, when we make this assumption, the residual flexible federal highway revenues, we typically allocate to the 10-year plan. So although on the back end, when we reconcile, it typically hits the program reserve. On the front end, when we project the budget, it ends up, you'll see those changes in the 10-year plan lines. So just wanted to keep that in mind. Okay, yeah, thanks. You're right on target there. Okay, next topic to talk about are kind of CDOT decision items. So over the past, actually maybe 5 or 6 months or so, we've been running an internal process where we develop kind of all of the region and division budgets at a very detailed level. And part of that is the submission of decision items. So all the divisions and regions can request new funds for various things. So it could be new or expanded programs or investments or initiatives. It could be things that maybe are one-time in nature that the program doesn't really have the funds for. So we've been going through that process internally, and we're at the point now of kind of collecting all those and looking at them and reviewing them. So per PD 703, Any decision item request of less than $1 million is reviewed and subject to approval by the executive management team internally. And then anything 1 million or greater would be, that is approved by the EMT, would then be brought to the Transportation Commission. So we plan to bring you more detail on that next month. The final approval for those items would then be included in the March adoption of the final budget allocation plan. I think we wanted to kind of note here, give you a little preview that right now, the decision items that are currently under review by the executive management team total about $2.5 to $3 million. So approving those requests would require a reallocation from the commission reserve funds line to the agency operations line, leaving a balance of approximately 2.6 million in that line. So keep in mind 2.6 million being sort of new revenue added on to any remaining funds that would roll forward from the current year, right? So that's not kind of a final balance number. That's just as we plan for 26, like new revenue. Next slide. Okay, so switching from sort of CDOT internal budget development to the legislative budget development, we have just 2 slides in here, which are a summary of information you've already seen. We brought this to you in the fall, but as part of the governor's budget request that was submitted on November 1st, there were 4 decision items included within the CDOT submission. The first 2 are related to kind of gaining permission to spend funds that we have in cash balances. So the first one, R1, Multimodal Options Spending Authority, it has 3 parts to it. So these requests are really operational in nature that allow us to execute and deliver the program and without kind of running into spending authority issues. So the first part would be to increase spending authority by 50.4 million to align with the forecasted fund balance so that the program has access to all of the revenues to be able to kind of award projects, encumber projects, deliver, and incur expenses. So the second piece of that is to request 1 additional year of roll forward authority for the American Rescue Plan Act funds that were received in Senate Bill 260. So that federal legislation gave us a deadline of December 2026 to spend the funds. But right now, the spending authority we have through the state legislature doesn't align with that. So what we're asking them to do is give us 1 more year to allow us to spend the funds as they were intended by the deadlines in the federal legislation. So the third piece, in an effort to kind of resolve these issues in an ongoing manner, we submitted a request to ask the Joint Budget Committee to sponsor legislation to continuously appropriate the Multimodal Options Fund. That would kind of be like a permanent solution that would kind of not have us dealing with these spending authority nuances in the future. So that's R1. R2 is sort of similar in nature, but relating to the Clean Transit Enterprise Cash Fund. They have 4 cash funds, 3 of which are continuously appropriated and 1 which is not. So we'd asked if the Joint Budget Committee would sponsor legislation to help that final fund be continuously appropriated to help us kind of operationally in delivering that program. Next slide. We have included here R3 and R4, which you saw previously. These are part of the statewide efforts across kind of all the departments to balance the statewide budget. I won't go into detail here, but we just provided this informationally. The tables on the right kind of showing the impacts on the one sheet. I will say that the legislature started last week, and so they are beginning to kind of look at these balancing efforts across the state and determine what legislation is going to look like. So, we're watching very closely to see kind of how those discussions evolve and what that means for what these requests look like over the coming months. I kind of have a little more information about that on the next slide, I think. So just status on that. Like I mentioned, the legislative session started last week, January 8th. We did have our hearing with the Joint Budget Committee back on December 10th, where they reviewed our legislative budget submission and asked a lot of questions, a lot of follow-up questions as they begin to kind of weigh all of their policy decisions across the board. They will kind of work through all that information until they get to a point maybe late February or early March where they go through a process called figure setting. And this is basically where they begin to vote on the actual numbers that will go in the long bill, the long appropriations bill. And so, we'll begin to know more around that time frame. The long bill is typically introduced in early April for consideration and then adopted by the General Assembly. It can be a tight time frame there. I think session will end May 7th. We'll learn a lot more over the coming months and bring you, information as we learn it in future workshops. So any legislation that impacts CDOT, which gets introduced through this session, we track very closely and in fact provide fiscal notes on every single piece of legislation that impacts CDOT. So, we'll just bring you information as we know it. So because of the timing issues around kind of our adoption of the final budget and the legislative session and the legislation that they're passing that impacts our budget, we just plan in July to bring you an amendment which updates our budget to match law. So any legislation that they have passed, we'll incorporate that when we kick off the fiscal year because of the timing of adopting our budget versus the legislature passing legislation. Next slide. Okay, additional adjustments coming. So still to come, as I mentioned, legislative changes. I went through that. Any updates to capital construction allocations? So as we learn more about kind of what legislation is going to look like, what those changes are going to be, we will come to the commission and there will be the opportunity to include any offsetting impacts that we might want to include in the budget. And that, of course, will be based on timing and information we have at the time. So we'll kind of keep tracking along that. Right now in the budget, we have built it around what we submitted in our November 1 legislative budget request. So we'll just kind of track along, I think. Decision items, we'll plan to bring that to you next month for review. So you have time to kind of see them and give some thought to that, and then come back in March for adoption of the final budget. The administration line, so legislative actions, cycle might require further changes. If there's changes to common policies, anything like that, we'll be updating those as well as we kind of go through the months. And then finally, maintenance reserve and contingency reserve. After final adjustments for common policy and consideration of current balances in maintenance and contingency reserve funds, we may return and also kind of ask you to consider options for the allocation of any residual flexible HUTF funding to kind of balance those lines and make decisions around those funds. So I think this is my final slide. Let's see what the next one looks like. Oh, I have one more. Okay, so just a little bit more about timeline. I think I kind of mentioned these things already, sort of what we'll be bringing to you next month and then in March. I won't repeat myself. So I think that's all I have. If you have any questions, we can take those.
Okay, Commissioner Garcia.
Thank you. Great presentation. A couple questions. When you say we meet with JBC, can you expand upon that? Who that might be? What?
I guess when I say we, I'm sort of referring to Jeff and I. When I say we, sort of the Division of Accounting and Finance.
Okay, thank you. And then a second question on R04, the reduction in the road safety surcharge from the faster revenue. I assume there's multiple agencies that have access to that, because I'm trying to figure out what decrease, why there's a $65.1 million decrease. And we're trying to make up money. So can you expand upon that a little bit more, please?
So the decision item that was submitted, the 65 million decrease is out of the CDOT portion of the fees. So it is only impacting CDOT. Does that answer your question?
So is it a fee reduction or it is?
It is a reduction in the fee.
Okay. So we don't want to hold the fee and not reduce it? What, I guess I'm trying to figure out why we would reduce the fee.
So this was in, I think, yeah, it was November when we walked through this. So this was one of the decision items that was included in the governor's budget request. So, there's pretty significant imbalance in the budget this year. So across state agencies, there were efforts to try to find opportunities to either reduce requests of the budget. And so for CDOT, there were two items put forward to do that. One would have basically reduced the faster road safety surcharge. And what that does is by reducing the revenue going through that program, it kind of makes room under the Tabor cap. I think at this point, it's just a proposal. It's going through the legislative process. We presented to the JBC. I think there was a lot of feedback and discussion there. And the only thing I can say for certain is that I'm pretty certain that we're going to see things continue to change. And hopefully maybe in next month, we'll have a little better idea of where that's headed.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, the connection to the Tabor cap makes sense now. So thank you for clarifying that.
Okay, and I think we've got Commissioner Cook with a question.
Yeah, thank you. On that same topic, do we have an update about the proposed road maintenance enterprise that we talked to the legislative committee about?
Yeah, so I'd say my update is a similar sort of non-update, which is to say that we did have our JBC hearing on, what was it, around December 10, where there was some discussion of that proposal. I think there's been some sort of continued discussions with stakeholders and others. And I think, some feedback received about potentially trying to look at different fee sources. So I think right now there's nothing that's been introduced. And I think, again, that's kind of where I indicated, I'd say right now things are pretty in flux. So I don't have a good answer on that, but I think maybe by the time we get to next month's commission meeting, we'll have a little better sense of if those proposals are going to move forward or how they look relative to what we described initially.
Okay, just a quick follow-up. If it is implemented, when does the fee start to get collected and when would we see it hitting our budget?
So again, don't have an answer to that. Nothing's been introduced yet. I think just looking at past sessions when we've had new fees come into place, they've tended to usually be on about a year lag or so just to allow time for implementation. But again, nothing's been drafted, so I couldn't answer that other than to say that's what we've seen in the past.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
All right, thank you. Any other questions, comments on this topic? Commissioner Ritter?
Yeah, a quick question. You indicated there's been a reduction in the revenues from the fuel, I think it was a fuel fund. Does that seem to be, is that a trend or does that seem to be a one-timer?
So we're basing our update really on the last 3 months of data that we've seen. So it's hard to tell at this point whether it's a trend or not. We're going to keep our eye on it to see what that means. But we're really just adjusting the forecast, looking at kind of the last 3 months since our last quarter.
And with those revenues, could they be impacted by increased number of electric vehicles or any other sort of, shall we say, other than truck utility?
So the HUTF forecast, the first and second stream that we're talking about, could, it's the fuel tax, and some registration fees that are in there. So there could be any combination of things that impact, those two streams of the HUTF.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks. Other comments, questions? Hearing none. Whoops, hearing none. Thanks, Bethany. And I think we've got another item on here, the state match. Is that Jeff or Bethany?
That was the first item.
Oh, you did that
Yeah,
already.
we might have had that on there an extra time.
So
That
we-
was the state match for the Avalanche.
Knocked it out
Medical
already.
mitigation.
Okay. All right, good enough. Thank you. All right, if there's no other questions, thank you, both of you, for those presentations. The next item is the Fuel Impact Enterprise Workshop, and that is Darius.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have Craig Hurst, the Fuel Mobility and Safety Branch Manager, with me in order to answer some questions should they come up. What we're going to do today is give a brief overview, especially since we haven't talked about this enterprise in a little bit, and discuss some potential changes to the FY25 budget that we may bring forward next month for your approval, for your consideration and approval. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So just as a high level, the enterprise was created in 2023 with Senate Bill 23280. It established the Fuels Impact Enterprise and the Fuels Impact Grant Program. In addition, it had other regulations in regard to petroleum storage tank funds and regulations regarding that to the Department of Labor and Employment. And of course, today we're going to be talking about the enterprise in particular. Next slide, please. So the enterprise was officially created on August 8th, 2023. It does expire barring any further action by the legislature on January 1st of 2030. It is its business purpose is to improve the transportation of fuel and monitor vehicle emissions. And the board of directors is, of course, the Colorado Transportation Commission. The enterprise can impose the fuel impact reduction fee, which has already been done. That was done in September of 2023. It can issue grants authorized by the Fuels Impact Reduction Program, issue bonds payable from the fee, and provided services set forth in statute and other powers as implied in statute in accordance with the rules regarding enterprises. Next slide, please. The fuel impact reduction fee, the enterprise board of directors set this at, this is a fun number to say, but I'm going to try to get it out there. 6,125 millionths of a dollar per gallon of fuel products that are sold for sale in Colorado. This is paid by the licensed fuel excise tax distributors, and that fee collected started after that decision was made on September 1st, 2023. We'll note that the cash flow cannot exceed $15 million in its fund. Next slide, please. Per statute, the grant program is allocated in two different allocations, so to speak. 10 million must go to allocations to specific local governments that are outlined in statute. That will be in the next slide. And then 5 million is for projects that are administered by and chosen by the enterprise board of directors. And it could be projects related to transportation of fuel, hazardous mitigation corridors, environmental mitigation, and emergency responses. Next slide, please. This slide outlines the distribution of the fee per statute. 64% of the 10 million goes to Adams County, 20% to the city of Aurora, 13% to El Paso County, 2.4%, excuse me, to Mesa County, and 0.6% to Otero County. If the enterprise is unable to distribute 10 million, the amount that it is able to distribute to those localities will be done in proportion. And then any subdivision that is unable to accept those funds, the rest of the funds will be distributed out proportionally. Next slide, please. For the Fuels Impact Enterprise, I think this will be a continuing item of discussion with the enterprise board to see how to distribute its its allocation, but it can use it can distribute to the two projects that are related to the following. So commercial freight corridor projects, emergency responses, environmental mitigation, and transportation of fuel. And I believe that we'll have more items for board's consideration on those at future meetings of the board of directors. Next slide, please. We did talk about the fiscal year 26 budget a couple of months ago. As reconciliation of funds has been completed, we wanted to bring forward just an update of where we're at, make some potential adjustments for the FY25 budget to make sure all of the allocations that are required in statute are within those line items, and then talk about some obligated funds in the fuel impact fund. So these are the revenues that were collected from between FY24 and FY25. Going on to the next slide. And these are the statutory obligations for both FY24 and FY25, which includes the amounts that are authorized within statute, and both fiscal year 24 and 25 statutory distribution for the board's discretion. And that totals about $30 million. Next slide, please. This is what the board had approved when it approved the FY25 budget for administrative and operation activities, including staff compensation and other expenses, and a board contingency reserve of $100,000. We are not anticipating any changes to that at this time. Next slide, please. Based off of the revenues that were collected and the statutory distributions, there is an unobligated amount in that cash fund of about $1.3 million. Statute is silent on the procedure on how to allocate those funds, and after consulting with our partners at the Department of Law, determined that the Board of Directors, getting good advice from the Board of Directors on how to distribute that, and we have presented two options for consideration. One is to distribute the $1.3 million to the local agencies already identified in statute according to the formula that is been prescribed in statute. And the other option is to distribute that to the enterprise-directed fund balance to be used on statewide fuel impact projects. So that is a potential item that we're asking for clarification from the board on how it would like to proceed, and we will bring that forth for a decision item next month's meeting. Next slide, please. And then just to keep the board updated, most of the work of the enterprise has been trying to get the FY24 funds through an intergovernmental agreement to the agencies prescribed within statute, including the 4 counties and the 1 city. So that has been most of the work of the enterprise as of this date. We are very close and is working with the staff that's assigned for enterprise work from CDOT's Division of Accounting and Finance to finalize those intergovernmental agreements, and those should be done here, we believe, in the next couple of months, and then identifying potential areas on which the board can allocate funds in order to meet the business purpose of the enterprise with its allocation of $5 million each year. And with that, I think this slide is kind of a repeat, but I'm open for any questions the board has, or if there is a preference on one of the two options in regards to the distribution of the unobligated funds.
All right, any questions? Darius, the only question, I'm sorry. Okay, the only question I had was the slide where it was showing, our mandatory distributions to the various entities.
Yes.
It looked like, at least as I was understanding that slide, it was showing the 2 fiscal years, and so it was basically doubled for all the entities, but for Otero County, it only seemed to be a single year. It was just a 60,000. I didn't know if there's something unique about the Otero County distribution.
I apologize. It should be 120,000.
Oh, okay.
That was a slide typo.
Oh, okay, good enough. I noticed it and I thought, well, maybe there's something unique about that particular one.
No, that was a slide typo.
Good enough, thank you. Commissioner Stewart.
Thank you. Of the 2 options you're asking us to make a decision on, is there a staff recommendation and is there, and can you give us a pro and con of each of those options?
From the distribution for the statewide distribution, I think it's easier to make the decision on there. The 1.3 million isn't going to add up to a lot for the local piece on there, but it could help on there. I don't think there would be a recommendation to say one local get all of it and one wouldn't get any. It would probably be best to divide it by the formula prescribed in statute. The only potential implication is of course taper implications in terms of what the statewide distribution would be. However, if the board of directors decides that's the best way to go forward, I believe that's not going to be a huge issue, but Jeff can always correct me on that. But there is potential taper implications from going with the statewide distribution.
Maybe I wasn't clear enough in my question. Between the two options, one distributing it to the agencies already receiving grants, or keeping it to direct it towards statewide hazmat and freight projects. Can you tell me pros and cons of each of those? So really pros and cons of option 2, because I can understand how we can put more into each of those buckets of the distribution formula, but what value does it have going to option 2, I guess is what I'm asking.
The potential pros and cons for option 1 is the potential con is the local agency is unable to use the funds and they'll have to be redistributed. The other piece is that that will just mean that I think this is not that big of a deal, but it will be additional work in order to adjust some of those IGAs if they've already been put in forward. The pro is that there is more money going to those localities that where the fuel distribution centers are located, and that's why they were chosen in that statute. And then from the pro side for the statewide piece, this allows the money to go to other areas of state for the transportation or fuel that weren't identified within statute, and allow the board to make those decisions. And then the con would be the potential taper implications on there. So that I think there isn't a lot of heavy where we would be at, and that's kind of why we're at a kind of an impasse with this.
Thank you. Can I have a follow-up on, so $1.2 million, what would that benefit in option 2?
That would probably benefit, it would depend on the type of project, but that would increase the amount of, potentially increase the amount of work that could be done with the enterprise to potential freight movement of projects, projects benefiting freight movement and the movement of fuels on here. So without knowing the specific project, it's kind of hard to be specific on that. I apologize if hopefully that can answer the question.
That's okay, I'm pulling teeth here. Are there projects out there that aren't funded now, that $1.2 million, Craig, I'm seeing you shake your head, that would benefit from this 1.2? Could you tell me what 1 or 2 of those projects might be?
Go ahead.
Thank you. I would say we have a list of projects that could go for years and years. But there's a lot of great freight projects in our 10-year plan that could use the additional funding. There's a lot of freight projects that weren't funded by our last call for National Highway Freight Program that could use that additional funding. And then, of course, there's a list of projects that are really just ideas right now and still need funding to be able to move forward. All of which we would be happy to bring back for final decision-making on where that money went. But I think there's a list out there that could absolutely benefit from additional revenue.
Thank you. That's what I needed to know. And I think that from my point of view, option 2 would be the way to go with this one.
All right. Any other questions or comments on this topic? Okay, Darius, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, that takes us to the next item, which is CDOT Speed Safety Camera Program. Son and Ben.
All right, good afternoon, Commissioners. For those who don't know me, my name is San. I lead the Traffic Safety and Engineering Division here at CDOT. Today we have Ben Achimovich, our Technology and Traffic Operations Manager, and we want to give you an update on our speed safety program. Of course, speed safety cameras are another layer, another strategy that we can add to improve safety in our work zones. With that, I'll turn it over to Ben.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to present today. Next slide, please.
And just to make sure we're picking up, can you put the mic closer to your mouth? Thank you.
No problem. In 2023 and again in 2024, the Colorado legislature updated the statute that allows CDOT to deploy speed safety cameras onto state, United States, and interstate highways around Colorado. Speed safety cameras are covered under the state definition of an automated vehicle identification system. CDOT is using the FHWA term speed safety cameras to be consistent with other efforts nationwide. As one of our initial steps in our program, we researched other states, including Connecticut, Maryland, Washington, D.C., and Pennsylvania, to learn about their successful efforts and to plan our program deployment. One of these critical items was that the DOTs are the primary administrator of their speed safety camera programs with strong partnerships with their state police. We have implemented this lesson learned, and we have partnered with and continue to coordinate with the Colorado State Patrol to ensure their continued support. CDOT will be deploying into work zones in 2025 as our primary safety focus. Next slide, please. This chart shows the overall work zone related crashes for Colorado between 2021 and 2024. We expect the 2024 numbers to rise as we finalize our crash data over the next year. Next slide, please. This chart displays the crash data trend showing a higher number of work zone related crash fatalities in 2024. We also expect the serious injury numbers in work zones to rise with the finalized crash data. Serious injury data is about 85% reported, and fatality data is about 99% reported. Next slide, please. The CDOT speed safety camera program's overall objective is to reduce speeds and increase safety. Other successful state programs have seen a reduction in serious injury and fatality data of up to 20 to 37% and significantly reduced speeding in those enforcement areas. CDOT plans to communicate the benefits of these programs to the public, local agencies, and our contracting partners. Slide, please. As part of our communications plan, we have developed a draft branding logo for our stakeholder outreach. This logo shows what we're requesting from the public and why. Slow down for safety, focusing on 4 areas: safer kids, safer workers, safer drivers, and safer roads. And this aligns well with CDOT's advancing transportation safety and strategic highway safety plan initiatives. We want to express to you is this is not a gotcha program. We want to get word out, and we want to be very transparent about what we are planning to do on our roadways. We are coordinating with Matt Enzio and the communications team to develop a strategic and targeted approach through social and traditional media. We expect initial communications to go out next month in February, and then before each of our pilot deployments, we'll be doing a communications blitz, which will be critical to our program success. Each work zone deployment will have to be advertised at least 30 days before a warning period begins. And we expect the warning periods for our initial pilots to be longer as we fine-tune our program. Next slide, please. We are currently working to finalize our contract and the initial task order with Blissway, our vendor. We're also working with the AG on the completion of the administrative rules that will govern the program through emergency and permanent rulemaking. We are working through the procurement to ensure we have a hearing process in place when any disputes, when civil penalties start later this year. Next slide, please. I think we're good. This last slide covers questions we are getting regularly. Local agencies are not integrated into our CDOT program. They administer their own vendors and own programs with the requirement that if they want to install speed safety camera corridors on CDOT highways and US highways, that they get CDOT and CSP approval. The CDOT vendor is responsible for backend system that detects violations, sends out appropriate notifications, violations, warnings, and civil assessments, and then collects that civil penalties for those notifications. The program approach allows us to vary the size of the program each year, with the initial year costs ranging from 2 to 5 million based on deployment sizes and locations. Thank you, and we're happy to address any questions and comments that you have.
All right, any questions, comments about this program? Gary.
Gary Beatty, the STAC chair. I would ask that you come present this to STAC for feedback from statewide perspective and how this could help reduce that or improve the safety. This was an idea I've always kind of supported, especially for work zones. A question, are there going to be signs warning people that there will be photo enforcement ahead? Because I think that's one thing, especially for CDOT getting it on state highways, is making sure that people are aware of it. It's not just a gotcha revenue generation like people feel with a lot of the city photo camera stuff. So I want to make sure that we're strongly looking at the safety perspective for the public and not that gotcha deal. And I think that's one of the big deals is signs ahead saying photo enforcement ahead for work zone. So they slow down and we don't have the issues and we hopefully don't have many citations because it's much safer. So that's.
We have developed signage as per the statute. There's certain signage required at certain positions along corridors and in front of cameras. One lesson learned that we've had from other states is double the signage, be very obvious. And so that's what our plans for every one of CDOT's work zones and corridors going forward.
Yeah, and if I could add, I think our communication through Matt's office is going to be strong. We're going to have it up on VMS boards. Anytime we do these speed safety cameras in work zones, there will be notice 30 days on our website. People will know where they're at. And we're all obviously going with that warning system first, and then second, we'll go to the civil penalty.
And Keith, I think that you wanted to chime in on this.
Well, that for the short-term work zones, I mean, when you have a big project that's going to be there for years or that period, I understand all that advertising, but shorter work zones, are you looking to eventually expand to doing the shorter zones where like 30 days notice and all that may not really be logical?
Ben, you can add to this, but by law, we're required to do those 30 days. So I think we have good communication with the regions and we can prepare for those shorter work zones. But our vendor is able to do the shorter work zones than longer work zones using different technologies.
Yeah, Blissway is taking their technology that you see out on the roadways and developing trailers. And we'll be experimenting with the shorter work zones, both for where we can put both trailers. This is a point-to-point system. So we have 2 camera facilities out there, take pictures. So we're working with them, and that is the system that will go into the shorter term work zones. However, if it's going to be a 30-day system, we'll have to have pretty tight notice for any of that. So maintenance zones will be kind of tough. We'll have to plan those ahead, but we're working on it.
Keith, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Keith Stefanik, Chief Engineer. I just wanted to add a few things to the great presentation from Sam and Ben. This is a, I guess, a strategy that we've been looking forward to some time. We worked very closely with the legislature over the past several sessions to make sure that the revised statutes really reflected and gave CDOT the ability to work with CSP and do this. One thing I would add is this is also tied to one of our wildly important goals. So advancing transportation safety One of our strategies for 2025 is to have 150 calendar days of automated speed enforcement out on our roadways. So we're tracking to be able to perform that. I think it's going to be close to get that completed by the end of this current fiscal year, but we really want to do that. I would also add that during the last legislative session, there was a lot of comments from some of the local municipalities and local agencies regarding some of the language in the revised statute or the bill. And we were able to work through that with the help of Emily to really, I think, calm some of their fears of if they place these automated speed enforcement devices on some of the state highways. We were able to create some templates that local agencies can use for the advanced warning signs, really some of the information to put out to the public so that we had uniformity across the state, because we're not going to be able to change the speed just on our own speed enforcement cameras across the state. Really going to need to work with the local agencies and try to build a network across the state to really get the speed down and be able to reduce fatalities and serious injuries. And I just want to kind of state the obvious to make sure that everyone understands this is not a revenue generating initiative. We will not break even on this for many years. So this is, we will be using our safety dollars to push forward this initiative. We have a lot of lessons learned from the CTIO lane enforcement, civil penalties and all that kind of idea. So we're working closely with Kathy and her office, Piper and her office, to take all those lessons learned and try to incorporate them into this initiative. So a lot of great work, a lot of peer exchanges with other states to learn what has been successful with them and what hasn't been successful. States vary by their state laws, so we're kind of working with what we have from our law perspective. But I think at the end of the day, this could be a game changer, especially in our work zones.
Thank you, Keith, for that wonderful explanation. And we did have Commissioner Cook and Commissioner Parsons had their hand up. Do you folks no longer have a question?
No, that answered mine. Thank you.
Yeah, my
Okay.
question was also about the municipality, so I think Keith answered mine as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Vice Chair Adams.
Yes, thank you. Just curious, what's the difference? What does a $2 million program in the pilot look like versus the $5 million? And the way I'm reading this, it sounds like you could vary that depending on the results or number of locations. But can you talk a little bit more about what we're going to spend? If we say $2 million, what will influence or drive that to 5?
Yeah, I think for this first year, we're crawling, right? We're going to put out these pilots. We're looking at 5 work zones initially. But Ben can kind of speak to the variables for each project, right? It's when we're going to enforce. Is there a hazard in the area that we're going to do the enforcement 24 hours a day or 8 hours a day? But I'll turn that over to Ben.
So with Blissway, there's a setup fee where they're working on their back-end system. That's about $1 million total. After that, it depends on how many cameras, how many hours, and how many work zones we want to put out. Initially, we're going to do one site. That site is going to be I-70 Floyd Hill. That's the #1 candidate. We're going to deploy there, get data, try it out, and then slowly expand. So we may only spend $2 million, but if it allows us to expand up to 5 and get to other sites. Yes. Yes, sir.
All right. Commissioner Garcia.
Great, thank you. Thinking about this and the CTIO lessons learned, there was, I think, $40 million raised in fines there. Let's say our traveling public is violating often and there's a lot of fees generated. What's your thoughts about expansion around the state in the different work zones?
Yeah, I think the key is going to be that pilot phase as we get those results and we look at compliance, right? I think other states have shown within 3 months. I think I've seen some states, Connecticut had about 10,000 warnings within the first 3 months and 1 citation. So we're hoping we kind of follow that trend. But yes, if there's results, we'll see compliance across the state and we'll put more of these systems out as we become more efficient, as our back office becomes more efficient, as our hearing process gets in place. So there's a lot of moving parts, but once we get the first phase and collect that data and we see that it's providing benefit in Colorado on our roadways, we'll come up with an expansion plan.
Okay, and Commissioner Gutierrez.
Yes, thank you. Is it possible to expand faster than the 1 year? And I speak only from a purely personal standpoint, having to drive I-25 north.
I'll turn that over to Ben because he has all the lessons learned from other states, but we definitely don't want to rush into this. Go ahead, Keith.
I just want to take that one because we put a lot of thought into this. We want to make sure that our initial deployments are tied to multiple benefits. So school zones, construction zones, that's where we can increase the safety to our workers, increase the safety to the traveling public, as you saw the stats in the work zone. We want to focus on those areas. We also want to focus on some facilities that may have 1 lane in each direction or something like that. If we were to put a pilot program on, say, I-25 or I-70, where we have 3 lanes in each direction, the number of citations are going to skyrocket. And that's what, from a media perspective, we want to make sure that we have a focus, our process is good. I think if we went out and deployed a system on a corridor, we have to be able, that's one thing to make sure that is clear is, we have the ability to do it in construction zones and work zones. We also have the ability to do it on I forget the actual name, but it's on a corridor basis. That has to be approved. We have to have statistics. We have to go through a process to make sure that if we do deploy it on a corridor where there's not a construction zone, not a work zone, that has to be an approved process to get through there. So we wouldn't be able to just go and do automated speed enforcement in, say, Glenwood Canyon. We would have to make sure that it meets certain criteria. What's that called, Ben, the corridor?
AVI corridor, automated vehicle identification corridor.
And so we'd have to go through that process. So if we ramp up too quickly and we don't make sure that our processes are solid, I think we face some scrutiny on that. So I think we get out there, we make sure our pilots, our process is working good, our vendors working great. And then I think we ratchet it up, but I'm with you. I would love to get it out and get the speeds down across the state.
All right, thank you. Other questions, comments? Well, I'll go ahead and toss in my 2 cents. Thank you so much for the clarification, Son and Ben and Keith, because you've answered a good deal of the questions that I've had initially, and I appreciate that a lot. And I definitely support the idea of, we're seeing a lot of this kind of behavior statewide, but particularly when we see it in real sensitive areas like our work zones. That's when it tells me that we've got a very serious problem that needs to be addressed. I do like the conversation that we just heard about the educational process that we're going to try to get out statewide, as much notification as you can with the specific work zones and that sort of thing. I think that's extremely helpful because I think that the purpose isn't to do gotcha, it's to achieve the result, which is slow down and protect people in these sensitive areas. And then Keith, you just answered the other question that I had, which was this broader category of corridors. That's extremely helpful that you're analyzing basically the various corridors that we have throughout the state. Where are we seeing the problem? Glenwood Canyon seems like it's a classic because obviously we have had some major accidents there. Quite often they're caused by this kind of behavior, speeding and reckless driving. And the effect on safety as well as the economy is just stunning. So it makes a ton of sense. I'm not a big believer, as we've discussed before, of having Machines tell humans when they're doing good things and when they're doing bad things. I don't think I'll ever change my opinion on that. But I do think that this is a critical area. So I do think that what we're doing, frankly, is the right thing. The only other thing we could do is spend a whole lot of money and have more police officers in the area. And we just don't seem to have those kind of resources in the state at the point. The other concern that I have is whenever we get into any kind of law enforcement question, I'm a firm believer that that should be done by government, not by a private contractor. But I think that the way you've described this, the private contractor sets up the system, but we're basically the ones that manage it. And that gets my comfort level really in a much better place. So overall, those are my thoughts and comments. Thank you for getting into the weeds on this and giving us the specific details of how you'd like to roll it out. And Keith, I'm with you. While I would love to see this behavior turned around right away, I'd kind of like to have us crawl a little bit before we walk on it, make sure we're doing it right.
Well, we appreciate your comments. We knew we had to win you over. We had to get the chair. So I'm glad you like it.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. All right. Any other comments, questions? Commissioner Hogan.
Thank you, Chair. I'm thinking a lot about this because with CTIO, the moment there were a lot of ads that started happening, and that told me that we had a lot of, unfortunately, a lot of violations that gave us the revenue to have so many ads on, I think it was like that, whatever, news channel. Is there any opportunity to be more proactive? And I know it's risky, right? Like we could potentially be spending a lot of money up front to educate, and then everybody complies, and then we have to figure out the financial aspect of it. That would be a really good problem to have. So I guess, is there any situation where we could upfront all of the marketing, all of the outreach, so that hopefully it's not as big of an issue?
Thank you, Commissioner. I wish I could say yes. I think that one of the things that we have learned, particularly with the CTIO experience, is that enforcement is just a bigger driver of behavior change than marketing is. And which is why I think that we are looking to this tool to really drive that behavior change that we need. With respect to the lane enforcement program in particular, I think that another subtler lesson that they have encountered is that the solid line movement violation is kind of a softer issue that people have gotten away with for longer. Speeding is a little bit more clear cut, and so I think as we look to message this, it's going to say you are speeding in a really dangerous place. Cut it out. We don't necessarily have the education piece on the front end that CTIO is now trying to really make a push on, and they're having some success with it, as we're seeing as their program matures. That said, we could always do more on the speeding push. I think that there's going to be some more straightforward opportunities for us. We're even just looking at upcoming press conferences, some things that get us that free earned media on the front end to set us up for success.
Thank you. I didn't mean to imply that no enforcement. Absolutely, let's do enforcement. And I'm all with you, Commissioner Gutierrez. Let's do it as soon as possible, because this is a significant problem that I think anybody who drives on the roads is seeing it.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner. Any other questions, comments? Gentlemen, I think that's it. Thank you very much. Okay, that takes us to the next item, which is the Bridge and Tunnel Enterprise Workshop on BTE 10-year planning, plan financing, and that's Patrick. Patrick.
Thank you and good afternoon. My name is Patrick Kalenda. I'm the program manager for the Bridge and Tunnel Enterprise. I'm joined by our financial manager, Katie Carlson. We're here today to give you an update on Bridge and Tunnel Enterprise's 10-year plan financing initiative. Next slide, please. So we'll start our agenda with a briefing on the recent 2024 refunding transaction. So this was approved by the board in November of last year. So we want to give you an update on how that transaction went. We'll move into a discussion on the planning status for our 2025 new money transaction for the capital plan. We'll touch on our financial forecast, both a baseline with the transactions that have occurred to date, as well as a forward-looking forecast, assuming we would move forward with our full plan of finance. And then we'll close the discussion by reviewing timing and next steps for the transaction in 2025. Next slide, please. Bonds on December 19th. The transaction resulted in $271 million in proceeds. As you may recall, the transaction was sized specifically to defease our outstanding Series 2010A Build America bonds and pay for cost of issuance expenses associated with this transaction. So in addition to this, we did have a small amount of interest earnings to the tune of $500,000 while the proceeds were in escrow. This is being put forward towards our future debt service payments. I also have some unexpected good news as it relates to the transaction, in that in between the time that you approved us to move forward and in between that and pricing and closing, the market actually moved in our favor, and we were able to obtain roughly $1.4 million in net present value savings for debt service. So if you may recall, our discussions were strictly around the merits of approaching this from a restructuring perspective. So in general, looking to update Bridge and Tunnel Enterprises' debt service profile and restructure that to strengthen our financial position in advance of upcoming planned financings. So just to demonstrate or help refresh everybody on the purpose of the transaction, you could take a look at the graphic on the right. Our pre-refunding debt service is shown by the blue dashed line. The bars represent our aggregate debt service after the transaction. So you can see that our maximum annual debt service was reduced, which essentially results in a corresponding increase in our coverage. This is generally seen as a credit positive by the rating agencies that will be rating our future bonds, as well as prospective investors. Next slide, please. So moving into the new money financing. So before we go too deep, just wanted to give a little bit of background or a refresher just for context. So in and throughout 2023 and 2024, we essentially brought you a problem statement. So really that was that the timing and scale of a number of our strategic projects exceeded Bridge and Tunnel Enterprises' capacity. And essentially for us to deliver those on the desired timeline and maintain our program's cash flow, it necessitated financing that was estimated to be in the range of $400 to $500 million in value. So the good news here is that over the course of the past 3 years, we're still on target. So in terms of the way that our projects have unfolded, cost, timing, resources coming into the program, we're still moving along through that process. To date, we've closed 2 transactions. The first was in April of last year. It was a new money transaction. It was $150 million in par value. That's all been allocated to our 2024 construction projects. So all those funds are going out the door now. What we're doing now is looking forward towards the second of the 3 contemplated issuances that we communicated to you and looking to size and structure that. So just generally speaking, the estimated size of that financing is forecast to be in the range of $200 to $250 million. As of now, it's trending towards the lower end of that range. And again, this is sized strictly based on our construction funding needs for calendar year 2025. So as a reminder, the reason we're doing this year by year and issuing debt in multiple tranches is trying to the extent possible, minimize the amount of new financing the enterprise is engaging in. So in general, looking forward to 2025, this is largely driven by Floyd Hill Construction Package 4, which has a significant amount of Bridge and Tunnel Enterprise eligibility. So that's really driving our decision-making as it pertains to the upcoming financing. So in general, there's no decision item for you this month. We're just looking to get in front of you now, kind of refresh you on the problem statement, let you know where we're headed, and we plan on returning next month with a deep dive workshop on the proposed structuring for this transaction. Next slide, please. So with that in mind, we want to give you a briefing on our financial forecast. I will mention that, again, this is the best information available at the time. We are going to dust this off over the next few weeks. We anticipate getting a new revenue forecast, going back to our project to get updated cost and schedule information before we formally enter into determining structuring for the program. So with that, I will hand the presentation over to Katie Carlson.
Hi, so I'm going to walk you through the table that you see here on the slide. So it's been a little while since we presented this. So the top line that you're going to see is going to be our revenues coming into the program. So this is primarily our faster revenue and then our Senate Bill 260. The next slide, or next line that you're going to see is going to be our 2024A bond proceeds. This is the first issuance of our IRB bonds that Patrick referenced in a previous slide. Next row that you're going to see is going to be our surplus and deficit. So this is a carry forward from the prior fiscal year into the next. That bottom line cumulative capacity and deficit is the same amount that you see that it's carried forward. Next, you're going to see our non-project expense line. So this is mainly going to be our debt service payments. Next two lines is going to be our project expenses. So you're going to have a line for the 10-year plan projects and for our safety critical and asset management projects. So for the first line there, the 10-year plan projects, that should be actually FY23 through 26 to align with the CDOT 10-year plan. And then on the second line there, the safety critical and asset management projects, you'll notice that there is an increase in fiscal year 24 and 25. That's due to the Blue Mesa project, the emergency project that took place over the summer. Then that gets us to our very last line right there, which is the 2024A, the infrastructure revenue bond. So that is the debt service commitment that we have when we issued that bond in the spring. That gets us down to the bottom line, which is our cumulative capacity and deficit. So you can see throughout all the fiscal years, there's ebbs and flows. We do reach a maximum deficit in FY27 of $233 million. Next slide. So this is the same slide as before, just a few tweaks that we added to it. We've got the revenue coming in at the top, but you'll notice the first yellow line right there. This is where we start introducing all three tranches or all three issuances of the IRB bonds, our infrastructure revenue bonds. The first one that Patrick spoke to right there closed in FY24. And then we have the anticipated additional two issuances of $200 million and $100 million respectively in each fiscal year. The next line is also the surplus and deficit. We then go into our non-project expenses and then also our project expenses as well. The additional line that we added here is the total estimated infrastructure revenue bonds for all three of those issuances. That's what we expect will be our debt service commitment. And then that gets us down to the bottom line, cumulative capacity and deficit. So there is a difference between this slide and the previous slide. Once you take into account all the new money that we're anticipating, that gets us to a point where we no longer are in a funding gap. Our lowest point ends up being in FY25. We're at $35 million. It's in the positive rather than the red. And then we also get to a place where we have a funding capacity as well. So if you look there from FY29 to FY23, we've got a funding capacity, an annual capacity of about $117 million a year. Next slide. We have presented this slide before. It's been a while as well. So for this slide, this is showing our PAYGO program. So this is what we have available with debt service emitted. This is for the next 35 years for the program. We've got two lines right there. The first line, which is blue, is the baseline for the program. So this assumes that we don't take on any additional new revenues or we issue any new we don't have any new issuances of debt. The second line there, which is the orange line, so that one is taking into account the additional issuances of debt. The biggest thing to kind of keep in mind between the two of these and what it's showing in the graph is basically it's the comparison or the trade-off between going out and taking on this new commitment of debt versus our PAYGO and what we have available or capacity on hand. You'll see as you go throughout the fiscal years, the capacity does increase as we have paid off each of those debt service commitments. We've got those call out boxes right there for each of those. And this is kind of what we're expecting to see going forward. But as Patrick mentioned, there definitely are some changes that we need to incorporate as well. So as we work through the next few weeks, refining any scope, cost, schedules with our project teams, as well as incorporating any changes to our revenues. You can expect some changes. We will bring that back to you as well. But the main difference between the two lines you'll kind of see is that overall it's about 20 million to 25 million is the trade-off now in pay-go as we go ahead and issue those new revenue bonds. Next slide. And I'm going to pass it over to Patrick to talk about next steps.
Thank you, Katie. So this slide just shows prospective transaction timing. So based on what we know today, we anticipate after this presentation here, we'll be going back to our corner to analyze structuring options for the contemplated financing. Again, that involves going back to the project teams, particularly those that we anticipate funding with bond proceeds, and making sure we have the most recent cost and schedule data. We'll then plan to bring you back a proposed financing structure in February for discussion. We'd then move in March to seek your approval to move forward with the financing, assuming that there are no loose ends that need to be tied up. And then we'd also be looking for your approval to allocate budget to our calendar year 2025 construction projects. Moving forward, the transaction would likely close in April, and during that time, we'd be coordinating with OFMB to reconcile our budget to include any changes resulting from the financing. This could potentially create the need for a budget supplement or a budget amendment once we work through the details. And then that puts us in a strong position to have the proceeds available for our projects when construction expenditures begin in May of this year. Next slide, please. And that's all we have for you today. Happy to answer any questions or comments you may have, and I'll pass it back to the chair.
All right, thank you, Patrick and Katie. Any comments, questions? Commissioner Garcia.
Great presentation, thank you. If you can go back a couple of slides to that second table, please. One down, that one. So those are some big numbers there in FY 29 to 33 that we see a cumulative capacity. Can you report on that? And then also, if that arrow below in the 117 million is annual, is it of those 5 line items? Because my math comes up different than 117 million. So a couple questions there.
Sure. Okay, so just in general, I'll speak to that first. So we'll certainly check to see if there is a typo there. Again, it was intended to be an average. I suspect that we may have also grabbed 28, which is why the math might not quite be checking out. But generally speaking, the problem statement we're solving for is fully funding our fiscal year 23 through fiscal year 26 10-year plan projects. So largely to accommodate those projects, which I will note largely align with the typical prioritization processes of the program. Like the projects included in the 10-year plan are typical and really don't change the methodology and how the enterprise invests its funds. So we've really focused, you can kind of see the 10-year plan project portfolio ramp up and our safety critical and asset management project ramp down. That's not to say that we aren't addressing safety critical and asset management projects. They are just safety critical and asset management projects that are in our 10-year plan. So beyond that current 10-year plan period, I think there's a couple things to look at. So the first is that certainly, as mostly everyone is aware, the 10-year plan will be going through a refresh. So I think to some extent, our investment strategy beyond fiscal year 27 will be predicated upon those projects that are selected for that iteration of the plan. So really the result here is that we're in a little bit of a wait and see mode. So I do have a large queue of projects that we can move forward with, bridge replacements, rehabilitations, and tunnel projects. So I would not look at that surplus as though it's going to go unused, as certainly our bridge and tunnel needs in the state far outweigh the resources we have available to us. Really, this exercise is just focusing on delivering that first 4 years of the 10-year plan.
Okay, any other questions, comments? Looks like we're good, thank you. Okay, that takes us to our next item. which is request for approval of public-private initiative agreement. Bob and Heather.
Thank you. We're going to get a few people up here. Brought in the village on this one, so
Okay.
let everyone transition out. I'll go ahead and get started. We have an opportunity with a public-private initiative opportunity with National Renewable Solutions, and I'm going to refer to them as NRS here in the state. And it's a pretty unique opportunity that has certain steps that we have to follow to be in compliance with several different statutes, codes, to successfully implement an approved agreement and actually let the project move forward. Next slide, please. I'm going to give you a little bit of background. In October of 2022, the National Renewable Solutions, NRS, submitted to CDOT an unsolicited proposal, which under our statute, 43-1-1201, we can accept an unsolicited proposal to build a longitudinal high voltage transmission line on the I-76 corridor right-of-way, which is approximately 52 miles. In exchange for use of the right-of-way, they have offered CDOT fiber infrastructure as well as power infrastructure to power our devices along this corridor. Over the last 2 years, staff has worked with NRS to better understand their request and how unique their proposal is and how it could be accommodated within the CDOT right-of-way. Based on the Utility Accommodation Code, this specific and very unique public-private initiative opportunity has several steps, which include seeking approval from the Transportation Commission. Why this is unique? One, it's first of its kind of an unsolicited proposal through the PPI process that CDOT has reviewed for high voltage above ground transmission lines within the CDOT right-of-way. FHWA's broad guidance is for alternative uses is for the right-of-way, as well as the governor's initiative related to renewable energy. CDOT anticipates a bill related to longitudinal high voltage transmission lines utilizing the state's right-of-way will be proposed in this current session. Next slide. For some history where we are in the overall process, in October of 2023, NRS returned our initial preliminary master task order agreement with some revisions and comments. From December of 2023 to June 2024, CDOT staff and internal subject matter experts worked closely with partners at FHWA as well as Wisconsin DOT, who has some experience in this topic, to evaluate and review the agreements and terms and conditions, which required a deeper technical understanding of the proposal to install this high voltage transmission line above ground. So in August in 2024, NRS shared some preliminary plan sets. And from September of 2024 to November 2024, CDOT has hosted technical review meetings with NRS, CDOT, ourselves, of course, and FHWA to better understand and inform a potential partnership. So in December of 2024, along with FHWA, we did a site visit or field visit and drove the I-76 corridor where FHWA as well as CDOT staff was able to discuss this opportunity. We did receive FHWA's conditional approval via email, stating that they are concurrence with CDOT that we could move forward with the master task order agreement and to continue working with NRS on the initial stages for preliminary engineering. Now, FHWA does expect that detailed contingencies will be identified during the engineering process. So next slide. I just wanted to show it was a big effort by several key stakeholders and working group over the last few years to get to this point. Next slide. My program area is seeking consideration from the Transportation Commission to move forward with a partnership by following a few steps. So we'll walk through these steps and where we are, and it's not very often you see a public-private initiative come in front of you. We typically handle those within the department, but there's some uniqueness around it. So I'll interrupt me if there's any questions about it. But we do need to gain approval. We did gain approval from FHWA for the alternative use of the interstate right-of-way, so that's done. The second is receiving the chief engineer's determination of special extenuating circumstances, those are key words there, exist for the proposed project and is required by the Utility Accommodation Code. The chief is here today. We don't have that approval just yet, but he's here to listen to the presentation to be more informed as he goes through the process. Next month, we will be coming back to the Transportation Commission and look for the express approval to finalize and execute the public-private initiative agreement. Now, the domino effect of that decision, which has additional reviews and variances that may not occur within the first two steps. First, the CDOT staff will follow our normal public-private initiative agreement process and work with procurement and NRS to finalize that task order agreement, which really outlines the responsibilities and the concept of the unsolicited proposal. After that gets executed, we'll move into a task order, which then specifies the project areas, the infrastructure exchange, and the locations. And then after they get that, the partner then must apply to obtain a permit from the region and implement the work as agreed upon in the task order. So next slide. Now, why is the Transportation Commission needs to have some consideration around this? In section 3225 of the CDOT Utility Accommodation Code, it prohibits longitudinal utility installations unless CDOT determines special extenuating circumstances. And CDOT here, the individual that is able to determine that special extenuating circumstances is the chief engineer. Next, the NRS project contemplated under the PPI agreement includes construction of new overhead transmission lines located in the interstate right-of-way. As a result, the chief engineer must first determine special extenuating circumstances exist for NRS to meet the exception to the general prohibition of new longitudinal installations. Additionally, because NRS proposes overhead, not underground, CDOT will grant a variance to the Utility Accommodation Code as part of the permitting phase of the project. So these are the domino effects that happen from your expressed approval. And then next, the PPI project under section 3226 of the CDOT's Utility Accommodation Code is the express approval of the Transportation Commission. And then we also need FHWAs, and we already have their verbal right now. We did not want to bring that to you until we at least had somewhat of a thumbs up from them. Next slide. I wanted to bring up a little bit of the political context. Currently, there are several departments within the state that are looking at a proposal of a bill that other states have also received. Next Gen Highways and the Colorado Electric Transmission Authority have floated an idea with the Colorado Energy Office, the Governor's Office, Public Utilities Commission of some bills that would highlight a few things. One would be the language would be put into state law that would explicitly allow for or encourage the use of highway right-of-way for siting new transmission lines, development of a prioritization methodology for new transmission lines that prioritize existing transmission pathways, then highways, then railroads, and then private lands, as they did in Wisconsin. Then some form of community benefit has been circulated as well, which is compensating the impacted towns and counties for such transmission lines to go through. We just wanted to have some awareness around it. And we believe that the Utility Accommodation Code, we don't need a bill when we have a process within the current statutes as well as our Utility Accommodation Code, and should exercise that process. But we did want to make you aware that this is somewhat precedent setting through this process. The commission have never seen one of these before, nor has CDOT, so this is kind of uncharted territory today. That being said, I did invite NRS to come because I felt it was their project to share the technical details and the why and the extenuating circumstances. And so I've asked them to come, and they've come in a huge village of folks. And actually, it's great. And I appreciate their dedication and how important this is, because we wanted to make sure that if there was any questions from the commission, that all of the subject matter experts, all the way from environmental, their engineering, as well as their executive COO, right? You're the CEO, is here to answer any questions that the commission may have. So what I'll go ahead and do is if we can pull up NRS's PowerPoint, and we'll let them go ahead and go through that. So if you want to do an introduction, go for it.
Thanks, Bob. Yeah, so I'm Mike Peck. I am the Chief Operating Officer of National Renewable Solutions. Who is NRS? We are an independent power producer. We're based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And our mission is to develop, own, and operate renewable energy projects exclusively. So wind, solar, and battery storage. We have several gigawatts of projects across the country, multiple states that are in the development phase, including just over a gigawatt of projects here in Colorado. Specifically, as it relates to this transmission line, we do have projects in northeastern Colorado that will be wind projects that we're hoping to bring online here in the coming years. Turn it over to Gene, tell you more about the project.
All right. Yeah, a quick introduction. Myself, I'm Gene Bryant, the Senior Director of Project Engineering for NRS. My colleague Julie Kennedy is our Senior Project Manager for this project. She was expected closer. Oh,
I have
thank
to do
you.
the same thing.
All
Yeah,
right.
move the
I'll go
microphone
louder.
close so we can hear you.
Thank you. But my colleague Julie, she's our Senior Project Manager. She was going to deliver some of this content, and she lost her voice overnight. So I'm going to do my best to take her place, and I'll deliver her slides as well as the technical content. But this project and this variance request under overhead versus underground for a 96-mile, 345 kV AC high voltage transmission line proposed in CDOT's right away on I-76. As Mike mentioned, this line is expected to carry at least 1,200 megawatts of clean, renewable energy from Northeast Colorado. And next slide, please. So this request, overhead utility within the interstate corridor in Northeast Colorado. Overhead is necessary for this project as underground is not commercially viable from a cost perspective and would also be prohibitively constraining in terms of its impact, its space needs within the right-of-way and the ground surface impact. So in addition to facilitating that transmission of clean, cost-effective energy, which would be equivalent to about 400,000 typical homes, this project also benefits Colorado through the expansion of CDOT's fiber network. Next slide, please. So the next couple of slides try to lay out a bit more of the detail of what this project is and some of its components. And so as noted previously, like we see overhead as advantageous with respect to surface impacts, as well as like joint use within the right-of-way. And that's joint use as in co-location with not just what the existing infrastructure that might be out there, as well as future infrastructure. And that's been a big consideration for us. Some example figures up on this slide illustrate the two scenarios that we're trying to compare and contrast. On the lower right, note the continuous nature of a duct bank for underground transmission, as well, and for overhead, that's kind of a typical pole detail. And those would be steel monopoles with a base foundation about 10 foot in diameter and spaced every 700 to 800 feet typically. Pole heights in this area would generally range from about 95 to 115 feet on a typical basis. And also we would design structures for resiliency and safety, including considerations for fire safety, with respect specifically to fire safety, given a lot of what's in the news and what's historical. It's worth noting, I think, that most fire-related issues have involved electric distribution lines. So the typical wood poles lower to the ground that you would commonly see. These for high voltage AC lines are designed to much more stringent standards. I think I had a couple more comments. Sorry, back one more, please. Some additional impact is when we think about the effort it takes to build the overhead versus underground. One important distinction is like that construction duration to build this 50 some miles within the right of way approximately 18 months, whereas underground is just, it's a lot more complex and it's a lot more material. It's a lot more removal and replacement of earth. And so timeline 3 to 4 years. And so you start to translate that into what does that mean as far as construction timeline, time in the right of way, environmental impact, disturbances to traffic. We see overhead as far more advantageous. Next slide, please. Just continuing on with some further considerations of overhead versus underground, going back to that right-of-way impact, pole locations. For discussion, we've kind of put that out there as about 20 feet, that 5 to 10 foot foundation diameter plus a little space in case something needs to be adjusted or you need maintenance. Whereas the bulk of the feature is spanning aerially within that right-of-way, and that's about an 80-foot width. And going back to underground, as shown in that previous slide, that's about a 50-foot width within the right-of-way when we start to consider how much space and how many duct banks it takes to move that amount of power. And that would be for the full length of the transmission line within the right-of-way. In addition to manholes for access every 1,000 to 2,000 feet. Whereas, back to the poles, we would design those to be far to the outer edge of the right-of-way. Our typical spacing based off of the design efforts we've completed so far would put our common location of poles about 85 feet off of the lane, whereas the clear zone is only about 46 feet. So we're trying to, stay as far outside as we can. That all translates again into just ground impact and environmental impact when we start talking the differences of poles every 800 feet versus continuous duct bank. Next slide, please. So a moment on this one on more of the operational and the maintenance considerations, and further to that end, overhead is really that typical industry standard. There's a huge body of knowledge on it and a huge experience base, including that locally. So when we start talking about overhead, we have a lot of options as far as local skill to be able to do routine inspections. It's also given the type of structures and the type of lines. A lot of this can be done with remote sensing, a lot of drone work, minimal impact or none during these kind of routine inspections, ability to rapidly deploy in the case of any sort of unplanned outage or for emergency repair purposes. But in general, like overhead has a really high reliability and a longer design life as well compared to underground. That underground, there's not commonly underground transmission of any sort of like material length more than for some specific crossings. So the ability to get equipment and materials is a challenge and would make things very rather complicated in terms of any sort of unplanned outage, any sort of fault, long lead time, and a lot of uncertainty as far as locating issues, finding those issues, and then accessing those within the right-of-way to make those repairs. Next slide, please. So in closing, there's a great need for transmission capacity with all the increases in Colorado's electricity demand due to, you've got a number of factors: population growth, coal plant closures, electrification of transportation, among numerous other factors. So the need for transmission is particularly impactful for Northeast Colorado due to its limited existing transmission, as well as the abundant renewable energy potential within that region. Overhead transmission, again, that's the industry standard. We can design it well for resiliency. It can be constructed and operated safely, and all while facilitating that joint use of the right-of-way. installation of the underground fiber concurrent with construction of the overhead line is kind of one of the prime examples of effectively co-locating it, because that fiber would run essentially directly under the line, not taking up any new or different footprint. So, oop, we lose it. All right. I wonder if is that auto time? All right. I just had a couple more. It's like, I guess to close out, we really look forward to alignment of our project with the governor and the state's clean energy goals, all while trying to be a really good neighbor and a partner to the communities of Northeast Colorado and CDOT. Thank you all for your time today and your consideration of this. And as we turn it back.
Thank you. I brought all the big guns. I have Allie and I have Justin from the AG. Everyone knows Allie to answer any questions around our PPI process, as well as Justin from the AG to help with any legal questions. So we'll open it up. They brought, like I said, a bunch of folks here to answer any questions the Transportation Commission might have. And basically what we will be asking next month is a resolution providing express approval of the proposed PPI agreement pursuant of section 3226 of the Utility Accommodation Code. So open for any questions.
All right, questions, comments? Vice Chair Adams.
Well, first of all, thank you for a very excellent presentation. I guess the question, and I'd maybe direct this either to, our internal group that's looking at our fiber optics, or maybe the AG's office. When we last looked at making our right-of-way available for transmission, we had quite an education about, making sure that we were doing things at the time we thought fair market value. So I guess, have we done anything, maybe even Jeff might need to comment on this, to really look at value here in terms of separating these as opposed to, quid pro quos into two different transactions. One, we're going to sell right-of-way transmission, and then secondly, we might buy some underground capability or right for ourselves, but those are two separate transactions. If I were just looking at the transaction to just this transaction here, have we looked at what the value of that transaction on a straight commercial basis would be in terms of what it should be? And have we then considered, if we were needing to buy on our end, is it a fair market deal or not?
Commissioner, could I hand it to Allie first, or do you want to take it? Okay, thank you, Kathy.
Hi, everyone. Great question, Commissioner. And so through our Public-Private Initiative Partnership Act, we receive these unsolicited proposals, and part of our due diligence in accepting those proposals is making sure that that fair market compensation for occupying our right-of-way is there. So yes, we have looked at this, and it does piggyback on the fees we adopted a year ago, plus a little bit, that if you're going to occupy our right of way for a purpose like this, then you do need to compensate us with fair market value. So we look at the value of that infrastructure they'll be providing to us for our own transportation gain, which would be that fiber infrastructure and the power that they'll provide to our assets, and see that that is there. Does that answer your question? Sorry.
The point you're making is the exchange here is at a value that if it were dollars instead of our getting it right away, the value here would be equal to what, if we were talking about someone else that came to CDOT and wanted to do a similar 1 mile or 96-mile deal, they would be paying a similar rate on a per mile basis as we're talking about in this deal.
Yes, we always make sure that we are treating everyone non-discriminatory, fair, and competitively neutral as far as the assets they provide us for the space they're occupying in our right of way.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Other quick, Mr. Hoagie.
Thank you so much for the overview. Thank you, Chair. I have two questions. The first one is pretty straightforward. I'm curious to learn about the impact that the construction period will have and the highway. And my second question is, I'm hoping that you all can help me better understand the special extenuating circumstances that allow this to happen.
Well, I think NRS can also chime in on the construction because I think that I'll just say from a CDOT's view, if you saw the picture of the conduit bank in the ground, that is extremely disruptive and could create hazards for a longer period of time. So from a safety perspective, it doesn't make sense that that would be the right thing to do. But having the poles pre-staged and able to be put up and strung in a short order, a couple months is what I was gathering. From a transportation safety perspective, we would encourage that instead. But I'll let NRS maybe further those details.
Yeah, I think the thing to add as far as the construction, staging sequences, operations during construction would be, a lot of this would be defined, as I understand, during the permitting process within the region. So we would coordinate with our partners there to understand, how to best handle access while maintaining safety, while maintaining traffic flow, and then just kind of, ultimately working towards, what is an agreeable and effective solution to achieve construction while satisfying, other considerations and concerns.
By any chance, could you expand upon the extenuating circumstances as well?
I'll talk about that. Yeah, and just real quick on the coordination, and it's my understanding by working with the local region, identify exactly where we'll be able to come off the access that the right of way and stay, so all the construction stays there and is not an interruption to the actual vehicle traffic on the highway. And they would all be planned and coordinated in accordance with all the different permitting rules and signage and traffic control as necessary to make sure everything stays safe and not as limited disruption as possible. As far as the extenuating circumstances, I think we're really focused on two, and the first is just renewable energy as a whole. I think that's the main one. As we mentioned, this will allow 1,200 megawatts of renewable energy from Northeast Colorado to get back into the main Colorado grid, and that's an equivalent of more than 400,000 homes. So it helps Colorado get towards that, is it a 2040 goal of reducing your GHG emissions? And then the second is the fiber optics. So fiber optics is identified as one of the other extreme circumstances, and I think in this case, be super helpful for CDOT to expand their fiber network.
And from CDOT's perspective, we did take a really close look at this, and we identified, in addition to those sort of special extenuating circumstances, this section of the interstate is unique. We've got about 400 feet of right-of-way in this stretch of I-76. We considered the volume of the interstate. It's a lower volume, about 12,000 vehicles a day. One of the big concerns from FHWA, right, and ourselves included, is the safety and where is it located. Because of that large amount of right-of-way, this is well outside of the clear zone. So it will not impact, there's no need for guardrail along the interstate or anything like that. Is definitely, we've got from our edge of pavement to sort of our right-of-way line, we've got over 115 feet, with the clear zone being around 40 feet. So there's adequate room. And that's why we feel that this utility is this location specifically is unique, as, we do anticipate this could open a door for other public-private partnerships. It's important that CDOT sort of defines what we feel are special extenuating circumstances. And a lot of it has to do with the context of the corridor. We looked at some of the visual impacts. This is highly rural, a lot of open plains. It's not necessarily in the backyards of large residential housing. So those were some of the reasons that we flagged it as, yes, special extenuating circumstances. And just to add on, the permit process, we go through a lot of detail. And so some of the construction activities, their ingress and egress in and out of that work zone has not yet been defined, but that will be defined as we work through the preliminary and final design plans.
And now go ahead. I'd add two more. FHWA has always been asking for alternative uses of the right of way. That's always been a discussion from solar, different types of even EV charging. We've been trying to figure out different ways to leverage the right of way. And since this would support green energy, we felt that was important. And then that would show in FHWA our effort to try to look at alternatives to the use of the right of way, as well as, we still believe in the governor's initiative relative to the renewable energy. And then lastly, this would enhance and support the rural broadband efforts that the Colorado Broadband Office is trying to do through some of the governor's executive orders and bills. We believe this would help expedite rural broadband into this part of the state.
That's really helpful. Thank you. I just thought because this will set precedent, and this is the first of, I can imagine, more to come. I think those outlining the conditions that make this successful is going to be critical. Thank you.
Thank you for that question, Commissioner Hogan. I think that was in the back of all of our minds. So I'm fascinated with the length of the answer. I figured that that's probably what it would be. We have several people who've got their hands up, I think starting with Commissioner Garcia, and then Commissioner Ritter, and then Commissioner Parsons.
Thank you. A great presentation. Just a few questions that come to mind. Will that be CDOT fiber? Be CDOT fiber,
Yes.
thanks. And on the right-of-way, one thought that came to mind was all our work that we're delving into with rail. Is there any consideration for rail, future rail on the right-of-way that this could potentially impact? And the third question was, I'm curious what the other ends of this 96-mile run are. Are they above ground, underground? And just kind of curious from that perspective. I'm totally in favor of expanded capacity for our renewables hitting the market, but I was just kind of curious what's happening on both ends of that extension right now. Thank you.
If you want us to answer that, we can go in reverse order. The third question, so the total length of the line is the 90 miles, and then 50 miles is in the CDOT right away. And so on either end, it's private easements, and all of it is above ground, exact same design and construction.
One thing I would ask is everybody, when you're answering someone's question, speak to the entire room because your
Yeah.
voice goes down and
Oh, sorry.
those on this side can't hear you.
Hold it. Okay. And then,
And as it relates to the rail, as of right now, there is no plan for expansion that I'm aware of. There are plenty of rail lines out east, but as far as the use of rail in our existing right-of-way, we don't have any of those discussions at this time.
Okay, and then we've got now Commissioner Ritter, then Commissioner Parsons, and then Commissioner Gutierrez.
Let me be sort of clear. I'm very much in favor of the PPP element, the renewables, particularly transmission from Northeast Colorado, and the access for rural communities to fiber optics. I have real concerns about the potential for real destruction, and I'll be blunt. And we've seen in this state the problems of a massive fire. We see today, every night over the last 10 days, the problems of massive fire, in part driven by electrical problems. And I worried because that area, it's not Oklahoma, but there's a lot of tornadoes. And I worry very much that given the landscape, which isn't exactly a, we'll call it a rainforest, that a good spark in a spark north of Fort Morgan becomes a huge fire all the way to Kansas. Explain to me what you're really doing to mitigate that concern. Because I think it's a significant one. And I don't think, I think we would be very amiss in our obligations if we not fully understood what you're doing to mitigate the potential of fire along that route?
Yeah. I'll take that one. And yeah, I think that's a great question and one that we welcome the discussion on. I'll make sure to go loud here. I'll go back to one of my earlier notes during the presentation of the slides that if we look at historically what has happened as far as electrical systems and the starting of fires, it's almost always a distribution line that's designed to a lower standard. It sits lower to the ground. Often those are on wood poles. They are more sprawling networks of electrical infrastructure, but it's not just as simple as that. And I'll elaborate on some other kind of design aspects. So it's either that or when it is a high voltage transmission scenario, it's usually in a heavily forested area where vegetation management has either not been kept up or is it a very aged 100-year-old type of electric high voltage transmission. So you're starting to see that like age factor extending infrastructure long past its original design life type of scenarios. So in this particular scenario, what we have as a high voltage line is a minimum clearance from ground. So if you have to start a fire, you've got to have that arc, you've got to have that spark. And from ground where it's grasslands out here, we're a minimum clearance of 36 feet. Whereas I believe the actual requirement, if you're a distribution from vegetation is only about 5 feet. So we're definitely keeping that clearance in mind. The other is a lot of this is really handled on the design considerations, and I'll go through a couple of those. One being, if we go back to that typical drawing of the pole, there's two parts, two insulators that come down in like a V shape. So we are approaching this with a V-string two-part insulator design, which provides redundancy. So if one insulator were to break, we still have connection of that conductor to the insulator. So we're still maintaining control. The other is that V-string insulator helps limit the blowout of conductors between poles. So where you have some sway, some blowout, the V-string helps to limit that. Both of those help limit the risk of any sort of circuit coming into contact with an object or coming loose from its insulator. The other is enhanced reliability through design in terms of how we look at extreme loads. So a lot of cases, like the Marshall Fire, for example, being extreme wind driven. And here, the typical standard is about a 100-year design life, and we are looking to design these structures in this line to a 300-year return period with respect to the extreme wind load. So that enhanced reliability through design is a big component for us. The other is really just going back to the poles itself are steel and not wood poles. So there is some additional resiliency in the event of how the structures could survive a fire that's not necessarily caused by the electrical system, but not wanting to add to potential risk or hazard during some other type of event. Lastly, I think it does go back to, and I made mention of as far as vegetation, we are in grasslands, which it's not to say it's less of a concern, but it's more of a different concern with respect to the distance of flammable material or combustible material to our actual conductors. There's more than just the design side. There's also how protection and controls operate on high voltage transmission, since we have breakers on both sides of the line. In the event of any sort of fault, the line would automatically shut down, I believe within about a 60th of a second. So quite robust protection and controls, which you also don't see on distribution systems. And I think Beyond that would be really our kind of operations and maintenance considerations of continuing to maintain a line well. I could turn it over to Mike for, he's knows certainly better on the operation side. Thank you.
Yeah, so we would multi-pronged approach on operations and maintenance. First and foremost, it'd be proactive periodic inspections, where you're checking the integrity of the line, looking for anything that might be potential of failing and getting that repaired before it actually fails. We would also be looking at the vegetation. I've driven the route and there's maybe 2 trees that I saw the whole time, but at the end of the day, one of the main rules for high voltage transmission is we have to follow the NERC standard of vegetation management. So you're looking for vegetation that can grow up into, which is typically only trees. And so we would be proactively looking at that and checking it every year and making sure that we work with CDOT to maintain any trees at a certain height to make sure it's not growing up into the transmission line. I think the second thing would be that not only will the line have automatic protection controls with the ability to respond within, 1 cycle, 1/60th of a second, this will also be monitored by a 24/7 control center. So in the event of, hey, there's a nasty weather, tornadoes coming, we can proactively shut the line down if it's about to be hit and avoid and de-energize it. And then the last thing would be is that, in our experience, even with our generation resources, we will be proactively coordinating, as part of the construction phase, and then throughout the operations phase, we'll be coordinating with all the local EMS, where all kinds of safety issues that might come up for us, we coordinate with them for that. But in the case of fire, we're proactively coming up with an emergency action plan, focusing, them on how to think about this, the kinds of trainings they might need, any resources they might need, and most of all, focusing that firefighting effort on containment to prevent the spread further, and just having it planned, even sometimes getting into drilling for that, like having drills. So we would do all of those things as a proactive measure to avoid any kind of fire risk that might be out there.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Next, we have Commissioner Parsons and then Commissioner Gutierrez.
Thank you. Mine is a follow-up from Commissioner Holgain's question, and given the precedent-setting nature of this project, this is more of a question for CDOT, the CDOT team. Will there be a process for us to define what defines a mitigating circumstance, or I think you said earlier it is to the chief engineer to define that, but will we have a process by which to look at this before we vote on it, or will these always be considered on a one-off basis?
I think they would be considered a one-off. I mean, I'll let the chief weigh in on his perspectives, but from our perspective, from the operations side, we would treat them as one-offs and then propose them individually to the commission.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. First, I just want to say this type of proposal isn't something that we receive every day. So this just shows, again, the type of information our staff deals with on a daily basis. So we received this proposal. Our staff, as you've seen through the presentation, has spent a lot of time analyzing this. One thing to note, and I'll get directly to the answer here, is this is not an exclusive easement within our right-of-way. This is by permit in our right-of-way. So not that I'm saying that in any type of threatening manner or anything like that, but if we do make a decision 50 years from now, 25 years from now, that we need to run a rail line through our right-of-way, and this is in conflict with it, there's procedures to follow through there. So this is a process. We wouldn't want to see someone expend on infrastructure and take it away through that process. But we are not granting an easement within CDOT right away. So that's, I think, one thing important to say. As far as what we would bring in front of the Transportation Commission next month for approval, one would be a very detailed resolution with information within that. And then I think we would have an exhibit of a and I can't say that word, we've tried over and over the past week, but I would issue a letter of why I believed it met those special extenuating circumstances. So we would detail that out to the Transportation Commission of why the decision was rendered by myself. But am I missing anything, Kathy or Justin, on that process?
With respect to the determination of the special extenuating circumstances, I will note that the code itself is silent. So the special extenuating circumstances per the Utility Accommodation Code are determined by the department, at which point the department will make that determination.
Can I make a comment about setting precedent, Chair? In this scenario, yes, it does set precedent, but we in the staff believe that the unique environment of this right-of-way in this part of the state is really kind of isolated into this one area. I don't believe we have hundreds and hundreds of width of right-of-way throughout the state. Even though we are a lucky state to have 87% of our right-of-way owned by the state, it's not that wide. And so I think if somebody else came up to us and proposed it, we would only be in very small areas where we have that breadth, because we do not want anyone in the clear zone, and we want them far away from there from just a traffic safety perspective. So the staff has been comfortable with this one because it is, what did we say? I forgot how many feet, 80, 90 feet off the pavement, 100 feet off the pavement. And our clear zone is approximately 40 feet. So you see how far that is. I don't think there's a lot of places in the state that this could fit again.
All right, thank you. And then next we have Commissioner Gutierrez and then Commissioner Cook.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the opportunity here to ask the question. I think most of my questions have been answered, but I have one that are there other projects? I know there are a significant number of projects up in northeastern Colorado that are you servicing every single one of those projects that's up there in northeastern Colorado? And I guess the reason I ask that is will we see the need for other companies having the same kind of transmission requirements? Because that's really the number one problem with getting all of this renewable energy is the lack of transmission projects. So that's number one. And if you're servicing them all, that gives me a little more comfort that we're not creating an unfair advantage for one company over another that wants to service all of those projects that are going to be coming forward. More of them will come forward, I'm sure. So I guess that's my final and last question that I really needed to ask. Thank you.
Yeah. The existing projects that exist, they're already being serviced by existing transmission lines. And then in this case, this transmission line actually is for the development projects that we will control. We at this time don't have plans to use this line to service other companies' project. It's certainly possible. All of our projects are in the development phase. There's a lot of things that have to happen for 1,200 megawatts worth of wind power to come online. It's actually multiple projects that we have. And so to the extent we can't utilize the full 1,200 megawatts, we would certainly look to allow other projects to connect to it. But at this time, we don't have any immediate plans to do that.
Yeah. And CDOT's not aware of any projects as well requesting access. This is like we said, this is unique. This is the first time we've ever seen one pop up.
I think to add to that, one comment on as far as more of the uniqueness of this location within the larger Northeast Colorado is that this line really services that far northeast corner. Like Northeast Colorado as a region itself is really quite sprawling and quite large, but this is that far northeast corner of the Northeast region, to be honest. And if we start to look at a lot of where the renewable energy generation is, it's closer to more of the existing substation infrastructure than this line. So it's more localized.
Okay, Commissioner Cook and then Vice Chair Adams.
Yeah, thank you. First, I just wanted to compliment everyone for identifying a creative, potentially win-win in this area. And I appreciate too, the very careful approach that the staff and other agencies have taken to evaluate it. One quick follow-up question about the fire risk is you talked about the standards to which the transmission lines are built and being higher. So I don't understand fire behavior to know if a spark behaves in a way that's different from an ember. Does a spark like fizzle out within a few feet of the ground, or can it carry for 1,000 feet or something like you're hearing about in the California fires?
And correct me if I miss anything here, or if I don't answer your question fully, but I think a lot of our mitigation strategy would be on the design side and designing for that higher wind load and the redundancy in the connectors and just higher resiliency is to prevent that kind of arc or that spark from occurring in the first place.
Okay. And by being higher, does that mitigate the possibility of it actually landing on a flammable substance, the grassland or something?
That's correct. Yes, it does. And it also puts that scenario where ideally by design, the line would fault out and then de-energize rather than faulting and arcing on like any vegetative material. So you're not getting that ignition.
Yeah, that helps too. And then I appreciated the comment Heather Paddock made about context. And yeah, I understand too, we don't want a fire that's uncontrollable anywhere, but we have fewer structures and we don't have the densely forested areas, as you mentioned. So that adds to my comfort level with it at this point. Thank you very much.
All right, Vice Chair Adams.
Very, very quickly, we've talked about the fact that this is the first transaction like this that we've seen in CDOT in Colorado. But I'm assuming that there are other places where this company has actually put this in place. So did we have discussions with them, and what feedback did we get regarding their experience with this, both in terms of how quickly, whether all the promises and all the statements actually were delivered upon, and was it completed in the time frame that it was suggested it could be completed? Were there any negatives?
We worked really closely with the Wisconsin DOT, who was the most kind of recent DOT counterpart who had experienced a project like this, and their technical experts. And that really helped inform us in working with NRS through our master task order agreement terms and conditions of things that maybe we wouldn't have thought of naturally just because we haven't come across this. We haven't received any negative feedback specific to NRS, but we've learned a lot about this type of project and tried to incorporate that into our contractual documents for moving forward.
So said another way, promises made and promises kept in past trends. I mean, you said you've talked to, but they've actually done this in other places and done it successfully.
Yeah, and I'm going to let NRS kind of add to where they've successfully implemented projects across the state. I don't believe NRS was the entity that performed the construction in Wisconsin, and so there hasn't been kind of that perfect scenario where NRS has worked with someone like a DOT in their right-of-way specifically. But NRS can speak to some of the projects they've completed.
Yeah, so we have not completed a project in Colorado before, but several of our development assets in the past, like in New Mexico, multiple large wind energy facilities. It's very standard for these large renewable energy projects. They're out in the world that they have to have some length of transmission line to get them back to the main transmission network. And so each of those projects would have had, I don't remember the links off the top of my head, they would have had, miles of transmission from the project substation to to where it interconnects with the main grid.
I would add a bit as far as with respect to kind of NRS and this project's like preparedness to design and execute on this project, I'd like to highlight some of our industry partners. So even with us here today, we are partnered with a EPC contractor for design, procurement, and construction of the project, and that is Blattner Energy, a Quanta company, and our engineer of record, which is Alteg, a lot of whom are based locally here, and some of whom also have experience with the Badger Coulee line that was built in Wisconsin in their right of way.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Commissioner Masters.
This is selfishly to CDOT, but how quickly are we prepared to take advantage of the asset we've received after this transmission line was in? In other words, how quickly can we deploy anything that has to do with fiber optic? Is it something at $300,000 a mile that they're laying at 50 miles that I consider that an asset? At what point can we take advantage of that asset to make it to our advantage?
Unfortunately, it's going to be a couple of years before we see that. I mean, obviously they have to get their project, put it in the ground, then it'll be up for either other communities to use. But, you know, we have to still go through the procurement process, get the agreements done, issue the task order. Then we'll have to go through the variance process, through the permitting. Several different permits will be required for this. I don't know what your timing is, but I could say if it's in a year, and then maybe late next year or the year after, we would be able to access that fiber.
That's great, but how close are we to a fiber line to access that? I guess that's my question. How much more are we going to have to spend to get to that fiber line?
We won't have to spend anything to connect to it. Right now, we actually have a fiber line in the area that we can connect to, and it does come together at the further west corner of our interstate of where their line is and our line, so we can connect very easily.
Commissioner O'Keen.
Sorry, I feel like I have 10,000 questions. What role will CDOT play with the impacted towns? Is this responsibility of CDOT to notify, or is it going to be, yeah, and then what will that negotiation process look like?
So that is something we're in direct conversation with FHWA, and that's been the concern. So as part of the permit process, we set some of the criteria of what we expect as far as deliverables, and a public process will be part of that requirement. And so although CDOT may not lead those efforts, we can put those requirements on NRS to hold public meetings and inform the community that this type of transmission line is coming.
Well, Commissioner Gutierrez.
Sorry, I too feel like I've got 1,000 questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess the question now on the question on fiber jogged another question. Is this the capacity on this fiber that is being built for CDOT have excess capacity beyond what the needs are of CDOT? And I guess I'm thinking back to having been on the board of Platte River Power Authority, we built excess fiber when we needed it. And then now all of the cities, the region is now being able to access the excess fiber that we were asked to build into that infrastructure. And I'm thinking if our goal is to get fiber and those kinds of things out into the rural areas, this would be a great opportunity to do that.
Yeah, for the span that they're building, it will double the capacity, which would in return be available for communities to use. Now, as fiber moves to the main, internet is out of Denver. So by the time you get to Denver, the capacity might get harder and harder, but for the stretch of it, yes, there will be plenty. There's so many different roads fiber can take, but yes, there is excess fiber that can be used for the communities. That's what makes it interesting for us, is that it's increased the availability for those communities.
Okay, and then I've just got a quick question. As I know that when major projects like this are going in, there's usually a series of permitting that you're required to go through, one of which is us. But kind of following up on Commissioner Holguin's questions, I've actually dealt with some of these issues from a local land use permitting process. And I didn't recall if I had seen anything in the planning process that had talked about any kind of local land use application process that might be required along the stretch of this transmission line. Is that something that you folks are already working on?
Yeah, and we brought our lead developer for the project, and I'll let him answer that specifically.
All right. You can hear me, right? Sorry. Thank you. Thanks, Gene. My name's Chase Marston. I'm the lead project developer for the Pawnee Express Transmission Line, and this question is exactly what I'm working on. As part of the development process, we will be permitting this project in all of the relevant jurisdictions, the counties and the municipalities that it will be impacting. We are in conversation with all of them already. One of the biggest pieces before we can actually submit any application is site control. And so working with CDOT to ensure site control through this process here will be a key gating item for us to be able to submit those applications to Logan County, Washington County, the city of Sterling, and then Morgan County as well. And then Sedgwick, we're working with as well, but the CDOT portion does not go into Sedgwick County for our purposes here.
Excellent. That's kind of what I thought was probably going to be the answer. And I was wanting to make sure that we got that out here because it kind of deals with some of the issues that Heather talked about, notification, Commissioner Holguin, some of the folks talked about, because in that permitting process, I'm assuming that we'll be trying to coordinate a good deal of that public education, public notification, and then a public hearing kind of a process in order to allow the public to fully hear everything and not be hammered over and over and over again by every single jurisdiction that needs to get involved. But that'd be my assumption of what you would do.
Yeah, that's all of that public involvement. It's both part of the permit process in all the counties, but also just something we do as standard. We want feedback. We want local engagement from the private landowners that we're working with and the neighbors that will be hopefully constructing the line in proximity to.
And by the way, the nature of the questions that I've been hearing here today are very similar to the questions that I dealt with in my previous life as a county commissioner from a land use perspective. So it was good to hear it from this perspective on the transportation side. Keith.
I don't want to belabor this conversation, but it's a great conversation, and it almost got to the question that I wanted to ask. So this is something that we're still working through as a department, along with the AG's office, is when we talk permitting. Typically, when we talk permitting, it's what is required by the NEPA process through this. And if you recall, I can't remember if it was a month ago or 2 months ago, we had some public comment in front of the Transportation Commission regarding this very project, this line through there. So we haven't expressly determined what level of NEPA process is required to utilize our state right-of-way through the permit process. But I wanted to, since our applicant is here, I wanted to toss it over and ask them what level of NEPA do they believe is required for this type of project?
All right, I'm gonna call up Stevie, who's our Director of Environmental Permitting, and I think she'll be much better equipped than myself to answer that one. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Stevie Kennard. I am the Director of Environmental Permitting at NRS. As far as NEPA is concerned, we are currently assuming, just based off of some of the documentation and regulatory documents, that this could qualify as a categorical exclusion. But we are prepared to address, any higher forms of overview. An environmental assessment is, also a potential, but our base case scenario for this would be a categorical exclusion. However, we have not had those conversations with CDOT regarding expectations on that side.
And thank you for that answer. And one of the reasons I ask is as we work through some of this, the ongoing session and whether we're going to have a proposed bill that could mimic similar to what we're doing, we have a lot of other state agencies that are asking, hey, from a wildlife perspective, how can I weigh in? From a resource perspective, we will have to most likely do a resource analysis within our right of way to understand what are the impacts of this project. So things could come up, and that's through the development process as we get through our permit. But there has been some interesting things raised over the past several months that we continue to work through, and we want to make sure that we're hand in hand. This is a private facility within a public right of way, not in the facility is not being constructed by CDOT. So this is just, it looks and feels like if it's in the right of way, CDOT's constructing it. That is not what is happening here. And there is some education to do from a public perspective and work through some issues, but I think we can. This is great information here today. I do thank everyone for the presentation. So appreciate your answer.
All right. Any other questions or comments? Well, thank you all for an excellent presentation. I think that you pretty much heard the read from us. We're very much in support of this. I'm really glad that when you're answering the extenuating circumstances question, you hit what I thought was the elephant in the room, the need to expedite connecting these renewable energy facilities to the grid as rapidly as we can, which I know we're all trying to accomplish. So I think that that's kind of the read of the TC. On the other hand, there's a lot of technical issues that need to be certainly resolved from the safety perspective, the fire perspective, and all those kind of things. Environmental is a potential also. So thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. And I think that that will conclude this particular topic. So thank you. Okay. Okay, I think that we are done.
Well, let's make sure that this start of the year is carried through to every meeting.
Okay. Commissioner Stewart wants to make sure that we do this on every single meeting. We end a little bit early, and we will do our best on that. But thank you all for being here today. A lot of really good conversations, and we will see you tomorrow. So we are adjourned.